Daniel, please. Daniel, don't go.
Evelyn Harper spent the next 40 minutes on the floor beside the dining room table while the rain tapped softly against the windows, and the grandfather clock in the hallway marked each passing minute. Daniel eventually lifted her back into the wheelchair, but he did it with the cold efficiency of someone moving furniture from one side of a room to another. He did not ask if she was hurt. He did not kneel beside her. He wiped his hands on a dish towel afterward and returned to his laptop at the kitchen counter while a half-finished cup of coffee cooled beside him. The silence inside that house had changed over the years. It was no longer the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other deeply. It had become careful silence, measured silence, the kind of silence that settles into a marriage when both people understand something important has already ended. But neither one has found the courage to say it aloud. For most of their marriage, people described Daniel as charming. At dinner parties, he remembered names, refilled wine glasses before anyone asked, and told stories that made entire tables lean forward. Photographs from those years still sat in silver frames along the staircase wall. In almost every picture, Daniel stood slightly ahead of everyone else, smiling broadly while Evelyn remained half a step behind him with one hand resting quietly against his back. Friends assumed he carried the family. He spoke that way often enough that eventually everyone accepted it as truth. But there was another version of the marriage hidden inside filing cabinets, locked desk drawers, and legal documents stamped with company seals most people would never recognize. Evelyn understood numbers the way musicians understand rhythm. She built wealth carefully, patiently, without performance. While Daniel chased recognition in crowded restaurants and hotel conference rooms, Evelyn spent late evenings in her study beneath a brass reading lamp, reviewing investment reports with a pencil tucked behind her ear. The accident happened on a Thursday afternoon 12 years earlier during a snowstorm outside Hartford. Emergency responders later said the road conditions made braking almost impossible. Daniel escaped with bruised ribs and stitches above his eyebrow. Evelyn suffered spinal damage that left her unable to walk without assistance. For the first year afterward, Daniel appeared devoted. He learned how to transfer her between the wheelchair and bed. He attended physical therapy appointments carrying a paper cup of hospital coffee and magazines he rarely opened. Nurses told friends how attentive he seemed, but resentment often enters a relationship quietly, through exhaustion rather than cruelty. The first signs were small enough to ignore. Daniel stopped waiting for Evelyn before leaving rooms. He answered questions directed at her as though she were no longer present. One evening, during dinner at a crowded restaurant, Evelyn dropped her fork onto the floor and struggled to reach it. Daniel continued speaking to the couple across the table for nearly 30 seconds before noticing she had disappeared beneath the edge of the tablecloth. Evelyn noticed another change after the accident. Daniel began talking about sacrifice in ways he never had before. He mentioned canceled vacations while sorting mail beside the kitchen sink. He sighed loudly while lifting the wheelchair into the car trunk. He reminded their son Marcus how difficult life had become. None of these comments sounded openly cruel at first. They sounded tired, reasonable, even. That was what made them dangerous. Marcus was 16 when the accident happened, old enough to observe tension but too young to understand its shape. He started eating dinner in his room more often. The seat beside Evelyn at the dining table remained empty many nights except for folded napkins and unopened mail. There was always a soft yellow light glowing beneath the study door long after midnight. From upstairs, Marcus sometimes heard pages turning and the faint clicking sound of Evelyn's calculator while the rest of the house slept. Long before the accident, Evelyn's father taught her one lesson repeatedly at the small oak desk inside his accounting office above a grocery store in Providence. Never confuse loudness with authority. He kept handwritten ledgers stacked neatly beside the window and wore the same gray sweater nearly every winter. He had grown up poor during the recession years and believed real security depended on remaining underestimated. Evelyn inherited his discipline. By 35, she quietly owned controlling interests in logistics companies, commercial properties, and manufacturing firms spread across 3 states. None of them carried her name publicly. Trusts protected the assets. Partnerships concealed ownership structures. Daniel knew Evelyn managed investments, but he never understood their scale because she never corrected his assumptions. When he referred to her work as a few little accounts during conversations with friends, Evelyn usually stirred her tea gently and changed the subject while candlelight reflected against the rim of her glass. The marriage survived by routine long after affection began disappearing. Every Sunday morning, Daniel unfolded the newspaper across the kitchen table, while Evelyn watered the small basil plant near the sink. Every Christmas, Marcus hung the same handmade ornament beside the fireplace mantel. Familiar habits can disguise emotional distance for years. Visitors entered the Harper house and saw polished hardwood floors, framed vacation photographs, and shelves lined with books collected over decades. They did not see the unopened anniversary cards stacked inside Evelyn's bedside drawer. They did not notice Daniel had stopped touching his wife casually when passing her chair in narrow hallways. Human relationships rarely collapse all at once. More often, they erode through ordinary moments repeated enough times that eventually one person realizes they are living beside someone who no longer sees them clearly. Evelyn reached that realization slowly, the way dawn enters a room 1 inch at a time across the floorboards. Marcus returned home after college believing adulthood might heal the family. He took over the guest bedroom upstairs and found work at a local architecture firm downtown. Some evenings he sat beside his mother in the study while she reviewed documents at her desk. The room smelled faintly of old paper and cedar shelves. Marcus often noticed thick folders labeled with company names he did not recognize. Once, while reaching for a book, he accidentally glimpsed a financial statement listing figures far larger than anything he associated with his father's business ventures. Evelyn closed the folder calmly and asked whether he wanted more tea. Marcus never mentioned it again. Families learn strange forms of loyalty. Sometimes love means protecting each other. Other times it means protecting the version of reality everyone depends on to continue functioning. Marcus sensed his mother carried truths the household revolved around, but he also sensed she had chosen silence deliberately, and he respected the boundary without fully understanding why. By the 10th year after the accident, Daniel spent more evenings away from home. Receipts from expensive restaurants appeared beside his watch near the bathroom sink. He purchased new jackets despite complaining constantly about finances. Evelyn noticed perfume lingering faintly on the collar of his coat one winter evening while folding laundry in the bedroom chair beside the window. She did not confront him. Instead, she sat quietly for nearly an hour watching snow gather along the fence outside. Betrayal does not always arrive as discovery. Sometimes it arrives as confirmation. The hardest truths are often the ones a person has already understood privately long before evidence appears. Daniel still performed kindness in public settings. At charity events, he pushed Evelyn's wheelchair carefully across ballroom floors while photographers captured polished images beneath chandeliers. But once the doors closed at home, his patience shortened visibly. Even Marcus noticed how quickly irritation entered his father's voice whenever Evelyn needed assistance lifting heavy dishes or reaching cabinets. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The moment that changed everything arrived during early autumn while maple leaves collected along the driveway outside the house. Evelyn's regular caregiver called in sick that morning. Daniel had planned to attend a dinner meeting with investors at a hotel downtown and spent most of the afternoon pacing through the kitchen, speaking loudly into his phone. Evelyn attempted to transfer herself from the wheelchair to the sofa while carrying a stack of folders against her chest. One wheel shifted against the hardwood floor. The folders scattered. She fell hard onto her side near the coffee table, knocking over a framed family photograph in the process. Daniel looked up from the doorway but did not move immediately. Evelyn remained on the floor, staring at the overturned picture frame while pain spread through her shoulder. Then came the sentence Marcus would later remember word for word for the rest of his life. Daniel stood beside the table with one hand still holding his car keys and said perhaps none of this would be happening if she had not become such a burden. Marcus heard the argument from upstairs. By the time he reached the living room, Evelyn had already composed herself. That was one of the things that disturbed him most afterward. She was not crying. She simply looked tired in a way he had never seen before. Daniel muttered something about stress and deadlines while lifting her back into the chair. Then he left for his meeting, the front door closing sharply behind him. Marcus knelt beside his mother and noticed tiny splinters of broken glass near the edge of the rug from the shattered picture frame. He expected anger from her. Instead, she asked him to bring the scattered folders from beneath the sofa. One document had slipped partially open during the fall. Across the top appeared the logo of a corporation Marcus recognized immediately from downtown office buildings and shipping centers. Beneath it sat Evelyn's signature beside the title chairwoman. Marcus stared at the page for several seconds before slowly placing it back into the folder without speaking. That night, Marcus could not sleep. Around 2 in the morning, he walked downstairs and found the light still glowing beneath the study door. Evelyn sat wrapped in a gray blanket beside the desk with reading glasses balanced low against her nose. Several legal folders lay open beside a cold cup of tea. Marcus finally asked the question he had carried silently for years. He asked whether she owned the companies listed in those documents. Evelyn closed the folder carefully before answering. Then she explained everything with the calmness of someone discussing weather patterns rather than an empire hidden in plain sight. The businesses, the trusts, the investments, the properties, all of it belonged primarily to her. Daniel's ventures survived because her firms quietly absorbed losses whenever his decisions failed. The house itself sat inside a trust Daniel could never legally control. Marcus leaned back slowly in the leather chair across from her desk while rain pressed softly against the windows outside the study. The revelation forced Marcus to reconsider his entire childhood. He remembered overhearing arguments about money that now sounded staged in retrospect. He remembered his father describing himself as the provider, while his mother quietly paid school tuition, medical bills, and mortgage balances, through accounts Daniel never questioned. Evelyn admitted she allowed the misunderstanding because it protected the family structure Daniel depended on emotionally. Some people require the feeling of importance more than the reality of contribution. She understood that years ago and decided peace mattered more than recognition. But peace built on silence eventually extracts a price. Marcus asked why she stayed after the humiliation downstairs earlier that evening. Evelyn looked toward the framed family photographs lining the bookshelf. Then she touched the wedding ring, still resting on her finger, and answered with painful honesty. Love does not disappear immediately when respect does. Sometimes it remains long enough to watch itself break apart piece by piece across many ordinary years. A week later, Marcus accidentally confirmed Daniel's affair without intending to. He arrived early at a restaurant downtown for a client meeting and saw his father seated in a corner booth beside a woman with dark hair wearing a cream-colored coat. Daniel leaned forward smiling in a way Marcus had not seen at home in years. Their hands rested close together beside untouched wine glasses. Marcus left before being noticed and sat alone in his car gripping the steering wheel while traffic lights reflected red across the windshield. The betrayal unsettled him less than the expression on Daniel's face. It was relief, the expression of someone trying to step out of one before fully entering another. When Marcus confronted him later that night near the garage, Daniel did not deny the relationship. Instead, he spoke about loneliness while sorting tools along the workbench. He claimed the marriage had already ended emotionally years earlier. What Marcus heard instead was justification carefully rehearsed enough to sound convincing. Evelyn learned about the affair 3 days later when Marcus finally told her over breakfast. Steam rose from untouched oatmeal between them while morning sunlight crossed the kitchen floor. She listened quietly without interrupting. Then she folded the cloth napkin in her lap and asked Marcus whether he believed his father loved the other woman. Marcus hesitated before admitting he did not know. Evelyn nodded slowly, almost as though she expected that answer. Affairs are often less about passion than escape. Daniel wanted to feel admired again, needed again, useful again. Illness changes not only the person who suffers directly from it, but also the emotional role everyone else occupies around them. Daniel never learned how to separate caregiving from resentment. Over time, he stopped seeing Evelyn as the woman he married and started seeing only responsibility, schedules, medications, and limitation. The tragedy was not simply that he betrayed her. The tragedy was that he convinced himself his betrayal was reasonable. Soon afterward, Evelyn scheduled a private meeting with attorney Richard Hale at a quiet office overlooking the harbor. The waiting room contained dark leather chairs, untouched magazines, and a brass clock ticking softly above a bookshelf. Richard had represented her companies for nearly 15 years and understood the structure of every trust and partnership connected to her name. During the meeting, he reviewed the legal consequences Daniel would face if divorce proceedings moved forward. Accounts tied indirectly to Evelyn's holdings would disappear immediately. Business credit lines Daniel depended on would collapse within weeks. The lifestyle he considered self-created would evaporate almost overnight. Richard asked carefully whether she wished to proceed. Evelyn sat beside the office window with both hands folded across her cane and stared at cargo ships moving slowly across gray water outside. Then she answered with a sentence Richard later admitted stayed with him for years. She said Daniel did not lose her because she became disabled. He lost her because he stopped recognizing her humanity long before either of them admitted it aloud. Divorce papers arrived at the house on a rainy Tuesday morning inside a thick envelope placed carefully beside the front door. Daniel opened them standing at the kitchen counter while coffee dripped steadily from the machine behind him. At first, he appeared irritated rather than concerned. He assumed the settlement would involve negotiations over property and support payments. He still believed the foundation beneath his life belonged primarily to him. Marcus watched the realization unfold gradually over the following weeks as lawyers uncovered financial structures Daniel never knew existed. Meetings became tense. His accountant stopped returning calls promptly. Investors withdrew. The country club membership expired quietly. Even the luxury sedan Daniel drove belonged technically to one of Evelyn's holding companies. There are moments when a person discovers they misunderstood their entire position inside another human being's life. Daniel experienced that discovery sitting across conference tables while legal documents slid slowly toward him one page at a time. The collapse affected Daniel psychologically long before it affected him financially. Friends who once invited him regularly to dinners and golf outings became distant. The woman from the restaurant ended their relationship after realizing his circumstances were changing rapidly. One evening, Marcus visited his father at a downtown apartment he had rented temporarily after leaving the family home. Half-packed boxes sat against the walls beside unopened takeout containers. Daniel spent most of the conversation staring at the muted television above the fireplace. He insisted Evelyn orchestrated everything to punish him. Yet beneath the anger lived confusion. He genuinely believed he had been the central pillar holding the family together. Now he confronted evidence suggesting the opposite. Human beings often struggle less with failure than with irrelevance. Daniel could survive financial loss. What shattered him was discovering the woman he pitied had quietly protected him for decades without demanding recognition in return. Evelyn, meanwhile, did not celebrate. That surprised Marcus more than anything else. Revenge stories usually promise emotional satisfaction once justice arrives. Real life behaves differently. Evelyn moved through the empty house with visible exhaustion, touching familiar objects as though reconsidering memories attached to them. She paused longest in the hallway beside old family photographs. One picture showed Daniel kneeling beside her wheelchair during their first vacation after the accident, both smiling beneath a lighthouse near the coast of Maine. Marcus once believed that photograph represented resilience. Now he wondered whether it represented the last season before resentment fully settled into the marriage. Evelyn spent increasing amounts of time in the garden behind the house despite the cold weather. She sat wrapped in a wool blanket beside dormant flower beds, watching birds gather near the fence. Grief is complicated when the person being mourned is still alive. Part of her still remembered the young man who danced barefoot with her in tiny apartments decades earlier. One afternoon, Marcus found his mother inside the living room where she had fallen months earlier. Sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor in long, pale rectangles. Her wheelchair stood several feet away beside the sofa. Using parallel support bars installed during physical therapy, Evelyn was carefully attempting to stand without assistance. The process looked painfully slow. Her hands trembled slightly from strain. Marcus moved instinctively to help, but she asked him quietly to wait. After nearly a minute, she managed to rise fully upright, not gracefully, not steadily, but independently. Then she looked directly at the empty space on the floor where she once lay humiliated while her husband stood nearby with indifference in his voice. Internal transformation rarely announces itself dramatically. Sometimes it appears in private moments no audience witnesses. A woman standing alone in a silent room, a hand releasing its grip from a support rail, a body remembering dignity before the mind fully catches up to it. As winter approached, Evelyn redirected much of her attention toward rehabilitation programs for spinal injury patients. She visited treatment centers anonymously and spent hours speaking with nurses beside vending machines and fluorescent hospital corridors. She funded equipment upgrades quietly through charitable foundations that concealed her involvement. During one visit, a teenage girl learning to use a wheelchair recognized Evelyn from a newspaper article connected to one of her companies. The girl asked how someone survives losing the life they expected to have. Evelyn considered the question carefully while adjusting the blanket across her knees. Then she answered in a way that revealed how much her understanding had changed. She explained that survival begins when a person stops measuring their value by what others are willing to give them. Nearby, physical therapists guided patients slowly across padded mats while winter light faded against the hospital windows. Wisdom often arrives through suffering, but suffering alone does not guarantee wisdom. Some people become bitter. Others become precise about what truly matters. Daniel eventually requested one final meeting with Evelyn months after the divorce settled. They met inside the library of the old house because neither of them wanted a restaurant audience surrounding the conversation. Rain tapped gently against tall windows while untouched tea cooled between them on the table. Daniel looked older than Marcus remembered. His posture had changed. There was less performance in him now, less certainty. For several minutes he spoke about mistakes, pressure, fear, and regret. Evelyn listened quietly with both hands folded together. Then Daniel finally asked the question haunting him since the legal proceedings began. He asked why she hid the truth about her wealth for so many years. Evelyn looked toward the fireplace where low flames moved across stacked wood and answered with devastating clarity. She said the money itself was never the secret. The real secret was discovering how differently people behave when they believe another person depends entirely on them for survival. That sentence remained with Daniel long after the meeting ended. In the months afterward, he moved into a smaller apartment near the edge of town and accepted consulting work far beneath the status he once chased constantly. Neighbors occasionally recognized him from old business articles while collecting mail downstairs, but most interactions remained brief and ordinary. There is a particular loneliness attached to becoming a smaller version of yourself after spending years demanding importance from every room you entered. Daniel experienced it while shopping alone for groceries beneath fluorescent supermarket lights and carrying paper bags upstairs without assistance. Yet humility can teach lessons success often conceals. For the first time in decades, he lived without applause, without dependency, without illusion. Marcus noticed during occasional visits that his father listened more carefully now. Long silences no longer frightened him the way they once had. Loss had removed many things from Daniel's life, but it also stripped away the performance he mistook for identity. Marcus eventually repaired his relationship with both parents separately, though the family never returned to its previous shape. Some fractures do not heal cleanly. They become part of the structure itself. On holidays, Marcus sometimes visited Evelyn in the afternoon before driving across town to share dinner with Daniel later that evening. The arrangement felt awkward initially, but adulthood often requires accepting emotional complexity without demanding neat conclusions. Evelyn never spoke cruelly about her former husband in front of Marcus. She simply refused to rewrite history into something gentler than it truly was. In the study, the same brass reading lamp still glowed late into the evening above stacks of reports and handwritten notes. Yet something inside the room had changed. The atmosphere felt lighter now. The silence no longer carried tension. Evelyn had stopped waiting for acknowledgement from someone incapable of offering it honestly. That kind of release alters a person slowly from the inside outward, like winter finally surrendering to spring. Years later, visitors entering Evelyn's Rehabilitation Foundation encountered a framed quotation hanging near the reception desk beside photographs of former patients learning to walk again. The quote contained no mention of money, betrayal, or success. It simply read that dignity begins the moment a person refuses to measure their worth through another person's comfort. Employees often assumed the sentence came from a philosopher or writer. Few realized it originated from a woman once left crying quietly on the floor of her own living room, while the man she loved stood nearby unable to see her clearly anymore. The final truth of the story was never about wealth. Wealth only exposed character already present beneath the surface. Daniel believed power belonged to the person being depended upon. Evelyn discovered power belonged to the person who remained fully human even after being treated as less than human. And in the end, the floor where she once begged for help became the exact place where she finally understood she had never truly been powerless at all.